The votes have been cast, the results mostly finalized, and now it's time to ask, what does the 2016 election mean for the future in the United States and particularly in North Carolina? Joining us with thoughts on that topic is John Hood, longtime analyst of North Carolina politics and chairman of the John Locke Foundation. John, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Mitch.
So you've had a chance to think about what happened with the 2016 election, and as you're assessing, what does this all mean? What have you said to yourself about what it actually means?
Well, the first thing that I've been trying to avoid is what I fear lots of other people have just dived into, which is to overanalyze and draw sweeping generalizations on the basis of what is essentially a pretty rare fluke sort of a presidential race. Now, there were lots of other races, and they all tell us something important, but not necessarily something transformational about American politics or about North Carolina politics. I'm not trying to downplay the significance of the 2016 elections. All elections, including particularly the ones that are on the presidential cycle, so that you're in North Carolina, that determines not just presidency, but governor's race and council state races and other things. They always matter. They're always important. But to say that the 2016 election is transformational in some permanent sweeping sense, I think is a mistake. Both the presidential race nationally and the governor's race here in North Carolina were essentially ties. Now, you don't get to have a tie-breaking game, or you don't share the office. Somebody wins and somebody loses. And the wins and losses at the governor's race are determined by the number of votes, even if the margin is small. And in the presidential race, it's determined by the Electoral College, not the popular vote. So lots of people have gone on tangents talking about, just as in 2000, we've got a Republican president who's elected despite not winning a plurality of the popular vote. And the answers are also fairly common. Well, that's the way the system works. The Electoral College is embedded in our process. All of these statements are true in the sense that if the presidential race had been run on a popular vote, nationwide ballot total kind of a stasis, then you would have ended up with different campaigns. You would have ended up with Donald Trump trying to turn out more Republicans in places like Texas, and Hillary Clinton trying to turn out more Democrats in places like New York or California. We don't really know what the popular vote outcome would have been, other than to say it's likely it would have been very close. So Donald Trump won the presidency fair and square on the basis of the system that we have, the rules of the game. But it is also fair to point out that he didn't get an overwhelming mandate from the general public of America. Indeed, he got a slightly smaller percentage of the nationwide vote in 2016 than Mitt Romney did in 2012. Now, why did Mitt Romney not become president? Because Barack Obama got a higher percentage, and we didn't have as many third-party candidates getting a larger percentage, and the Electoral College distribution was different. So if Mitt Romney got more votes in Texas and fewer votes in Ohio, that didn't do him any good. If Trump got fewer votes in Texas and more votes in Ohio, that did him a great deal of good. So at the presidential level, there are very important implications for public policy, federal budget, national defense, etc. And for North Carolina, the federal situation is that you've got a Republican Congress and an incoming Republican administration, and presumably pretty soon a conservative-leaning Supreme Court again, all of which, if the various entities follow their hearts or follow their rhetoric or whatever, means less intrusion onto states and localities. So if the Republican Congress and the Trump administration do what they say they want to do, that will move decisions out to places like Raleigh and Sacramento and Montgomery and Tallahassee. And that means that at the state level, public policy and public officials matter even more.
We're chatting with John Hood. He is chairman of the John Locke Foundation, also president of the John William Pope Foundation. And John, a lot of people look at elections and try to think, okay, what does this mean for the future? If I'm advocating this particular issue or that particular issue or sets of issues, how do I function moving forward? Being in the freedom movement and advocating liberty, what do the elections suggest to you is the course that folks are going to have to follow?
Well, let me give you two observations. One of them is that generally speaking, more often than not, candidates in 2016 who espoused freedom messages, limited government, lower taxes, less regulation, they did better than candidates who advocated larger government. Not in every single race, but in most races this was the case. In most tax increases that were on the ballot in North Carolina, they were defeated, sometimes handily, by the voters. I think that a clear message of the 2016 elections in most races was people want a more fiscally conservative, more freedom-oriented government than they currently have. So that's number one.
And beyond number one, other things that you found?
Well, the other thing I would say is that the coalitions for the two parties are changing, but they're changing on the margins. They didn't, a large number of Republicans didn't walk away from the party because of Donald Trump, or a large number of non-Republicans didn't walk towards the GOP because of Donald Trump. There were some marginal changes. They matter. Again, I just don't want to turn this into some transformational event when it probably isn't quite that.
Knowing what we know about the messages that voters sent about taxes and liberty and freedom, is that a good sign?
I think it is. The other observation I would make very quickly is people's opinions on some matters are fixed and stable. But on other matters, things like foreign policy or trade policy, people's opinions change according to who the leaders are. We tend to think people come up with their ideas and then they shop for a leader who will exemplify those ideas, and that's who they vote for. But on a number of issues where people don't have a lot of personal experience, they tend to follow their leaders. So back during the Bush years, most Republicans favored free trade. Today, most Republicans don't favor free trade, according to the fact that a certain percentage of them are following the lead of their presidential candidate. It's not very much difference. There's about as many Trump voters who were in favor of free trade as who were opposed to free trade. But that's a different story than we saw during the Bush years. That's a conformity effect. That means there are some effects of leaders on their followers, and we need to keep that in mind.
And so folks who are advocates of free trade will have to double down on getting that message out and perhaps having a better message.
Absolutely, but also prevail on public officials to make decisions that would then lead people to believe trade is good. In other words, don't give up on the Trump administration or the Republican Congress and assume they used to be for free enterprise and now they're for government control. No, push them to be for free enterprise and the public will follow.
Another potentially good message, I think, for folks who advocate freedom and limited government is the whole anti-crony message that not only Donald Trump but also the very popular Democratic candidate Bernie Sanders even tapped into.
Absolutely. Populism is a very, very real force. You can measure it. You can determine how many people fit the populist category. They have a mixture of views, some of which I, as a free market person, find abhorrent. But others, like opposition to crony capitalism and corruption, are very congenial to me as a limited government person. And I think when you're trying to build coalitions and alliances to get things done, you need to find what you have in common, in this case being against crony capitalism.